Hi, friends. So, over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've had this kind of conversation about expertise, and I want to dig further into that, and in particular, into Matt's response to this phrase, trust the experts. On one level, right, I think what Matt's trying to criticize about that phrase is how it functions as a kind of rhetorical demand, this demand to kind of defer to a particular kind of credential or authority, right? I'm an expert, just shut up and listen to me, right? And I think that fails because this claim to defer to expertise is not somehow Thor's hammer, right? It can't just be picked up and wielded by the just and the true. Lots of people can make claims to a credential, can make claims to authority. Jordan Peterson, famous crackpot, right, has credentials from McGill, from Harvard, from the University of Toronto. Do those credentials make him an expert we should all defer to? I think most of us would say probably not. So I think that Matt's kind of criticism of it, I think he's right. It falls apart as this kind of rhetorical claim, but I want to dig into it on a little bit of another level, because I think there's also this piece of that claim, trust the experts, that's really kind of an epistemic position. It's a call for like a broader respect for this idea of traditional expertise. What Robin kind of talked about is this sort of focused, formalized, deep knowledge of a narrow subject. And I think the way that we talk about that epistemic position, the way that we talk about expert knowledge and the value of expert knowledge as a form of knowledge tends to like stray into this polarized sort of discourse where we either valorize expert knowledge or we discount it completely. And I think that we have these two frames, these two narratives that either like discount expert knowledge or valorize it, kind of depending on the moment and what we want to do. And I think the one frame that really discounts expert knowledge has, I think, been brought into higher salience over the course of the last 40 years, in part by just a series of high-profile failures of expert knowledge in the middle of the 20th century. Whether that was something like the failure of Chernobyl or issues with pesticides like DDT, all things, right? Nuclear power was safe, said the experts. Pesticides are safe, said the experts. Paul Edwards, in his book The Closed World, also talks about how the Vietnam War became this big discounting event for expert knowledge, right? Robert McNamara and his Department of Defense were supposed to be the best and the brightest, right? These experts who knew what they were doing. They had all these metrics, they had all this data. They were supposedly like waging this data-driven war, and of course, they lost. The way that this creates a distrust in expert formalized knowledge is maybe best illustrated in the best popular movie about the Vietnam War, James Cameron's Aliens, right? Where there's this scene where like they're all on the dropship going down to the alien planet, and Ripley says to Lieutenant Gorman, and she's like, how many times have you done this, right? And Gorman's like, 387 or something like that. And then he waits for 2 beats and he says, simulated. And Ripley asks him how many combat drops, and he goes, including this one, 2, right? And all the Marines in the dropship are like, oh no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? He's done simulations, what we these days might call models, right? He has simulated knowledge, but he doesn't have real embodied knowledge. He's not even an hour ahead of us in what we really do. He just has this formalized training, and that's for crap. And so expert knowledge ends up being discounted as sort of like out of touch in the experience of real people, right? Coming from a place of privilege, isolated from the real needs of people, you end up with this frame, right, where what's valuable is a sort of popular knowledge that's built on embodied experience and not abstract formal knowledge. But it's only one of the 2 oversimplified frames we might use to talk about expert knowledge. The other one, which is what I think what some of the trust the experts folks are kind of going for, is one that like flips things around and like discounts embodied experience and valorizes formal knowledge instead. And handily, there's an example of this also from the Alien movie franchise, from the arguably better Ridley Scott original Alien movie, right? It's this incredible moment. The 3 characters, it's Veronica Cartwright and Tom Skerritt and the other guy who always dies, right? The guy who ends up dying. Or they go out to the alien ship and the one guy gets the face hugger on his face, right? And they come back and they're in the airlock, right? Trying to get back in the ship, right? And Veronica Cartwright's there on the radio trying to tell, right, Sigourney Weaver's Eileen Ripley, like, let us back in. You've got to let us back in. And Ripley's like, well, no, quarantine procedure says, right, we have a protocol for this. And the quarantine procedure says, I can't let you back on the ship, we could all die. So there's this kind of fun misdirect, right, where it looks like she's being a real terrible person, right? This feelingless person saying, well, we have to sort of, go by the protocol and we can't let this injured person back on the ship. But of course, in the end, she's right. Poor guy has, the alien embryo on his chest and comes out in the middle of freaking, dinner, and they all get eaten by the alien. Everyone gets eaten again. Because, right, they didn't listen to the formalized knowledge. And that's kind of like the flip side frame, right? Here, like popular knowledge, embodied knowledge, it's too emotional, it's too animal, it leads us astray. What we need are these cool, formal, distant rules that are going to lead us in the right direction. So we end up with these two frames, right? One where popular knowledge is good and valorized, the other one where expert knowledge is good and valorized. And I feel like we tend to bounce between those two frames. But what I think is even more interesting to me is that in practice, kind of pragmatically, we've worked out a kind of compromise that lets us deal with that seeming impasse between popular and formalized knowledge. I call it the libertarian punt. Sort of give you an example of what that looks like. So when we were expecting my son, right, we were getting towards the time when he was about to be born, you have all these discussions about, this risk and that protocol and this thing and what do you want your birth experience to be like. And one of the things we ended up talking about was this question of like, should my wife be induced if she went past a certain week of gestation, right? Because there was all this research just then about, well, as you go more weeks past a certain point, the risk of stillbirth goes up, up, up. Some experts were saying, well, just induce everybody at 39 weeks, right? Like, just don't go past that. Even though like the formal normal range of pregnancy is like 40 weeks, just induce everybody at 39, you reduce the number of stillbirths. And we had a discussion and we decided that wasn't really what we wanted to do, in part because just change in the risk seemed very small, right? It goes from like 1 stillbirth in 1,000 at 39 weeks to like 2 in 1,000 at 40, like 40 and a half or 41 or something. And so like, okay, from our perspective, right, our thinking was, well, we go from like almost totally safe to still almost totally safe, right? 99.9% safe to 99.98% safe by making this decision. So we don't really think that it makes sense for us to sort of compromise kind of our sense of what this birth should be like in order to make that tiny adjustment in our risk, right? So from our point of view, that was a sensible decision. Of course, from the point of view of a public health expert, right? There are 3 million births in the United States every year. If like a third of them are in that range of going over term, then you might have like 2,000 stillbirths if everybody, like nobody induces, and only 1,000 if everybody does, right? And so from their perspective, right, getting everybody to induce early could save 1,000 people from the horrific tragedy of an unexpected like full-term stillbirth. So my point here is that both our perspective, right, like paying this cost to go from basically absolutely safe to almost basically absolutely safe didn't make sense. From the perspective of the expert, right, the public health expert, like saving 1,000 people from this horrific tragedy at a minimal cost also kind of makes sense, right? It's not that one form of knowledge is good and true and the other is ridiculous. They're both true, to use the Obi-Wan phrase, from a certain point of view. So, what becomes really interesting, right, is how we resolved that, which is how I think our society resolves this situation as often as not, right? We said, okay, the individual has been given the expert knowledge. They've been advised of the risk to them and of the benefits. Now you make the decision, right? The libertarian punt, the punt to individual choice. Like, we gave you the knowledge you need. You go figure it out for yourself. And in this case, that made sense. And in a lot of cases, it makes sense. It's a reason we've like arrived at this as a compromise. But things like COVID and like climate change make that compromise fall apart. Because now individuals aren't making choices for themselves, right? I'm not just taking a risk with my own health if I don't take COVID precautions. I'm taking a risk with everybody else's health, right? I'm not just taking a risk with my own climate if I burn a ton of fossil fuel. I'm taking a risk with the livable climate for everybody on the planet, right? And in particular, in the case of both COVID and climate change, folks who make risky decisions may not be the ones at most risk of bearing the consequences. And so under those circumstances, right, we need collective policy to guide collective behavior. You can't do the libertarian punt. You can't just say, well, we've given you the best knowledge we have, like you figure it out for yourself. And so then we need trust, right? And some sort of guidelines for making that collective decision. Not necessarily in experts, right? Individual experts, but in the institutions that vet and credential and oversee experts, right? That really seems like a crucial thing that we need. But building that trust is going to be absurdly hard in an adversarial communication environment, and it's certainly not going to be achieved just by yelling at people to trust the experts. What will that take? I don't know. What's Sigourney Weaver up to? Maybe you have some ideas, friends, or maybe you're ready to talk about something else. Either way, I really look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you then. Take care.